This is Chapter 7. Millicent Winship was 77 years old, 92 pounds, ridiculously rich, and as tough as a garfish. Her only daughter, Whitney, had shamed the family by abandoning her husband and son and moving to Paris, where she had opened a cheese shop. Mrs. Winship didn't care much for the fellow Whitney had married, but she felt very bad that he had been left alone to raise her only grandchild, a burly but rebellious boy named Dwayne, after his father. So Mrs. Winship had decided that at least she could do was provide her grandson with the best possible education. Because of his poor grades and occasional behavior problems, the Truman School wasn't exactly eager to have a young Dwayne Jr. as a student. Mrs. Winship solved that problem by extending an extremely large check. It wasn't often that she got to see Dwayne Jr. because she divided her time among 5 different homes in different states: California, New York, Arizona, South Carolina, and Florida. All of Mrs. Winship's houses were located on championship golf courses. She herself didn't play the game, but she loved watching the players traipse in their colorful outfits down the emerald slopes, pausing every few steps to hack feverishly at the tiny white sphere. Mrs. Winship thought golf was the most amusing spectacle that she had ever seen, and she would spend hours spying on passing foursomes through the special high-powered binoculars that kept on the back window sill at each of her fairway residences. Mrs. Winship spent only 2 weeks a year in Naples, but during those visits she always invited Dwayne Jr. and his father out to dinner. If they failed to respond promptly, Mrs. Winship would command her chauffeur to drive her to the screwed household so that she could personally raise a ruckus, which was her intention on this day as she rapped sharply on the screen door and barked her grandson's name over the note of Mozart's symphony that was blaring from the stereo speakers inside. Before long, the music cut off and Dwayne Scrooge Sr. shuffled to the door. He was flustered to see Mrs. Winship and made a half-hearted pass at smoothing the tangle of oily hair under the trucker's cap. "Afternoon, Millie," he said with false cheeriness. "What brings you here?" "My grandson. What do you think?" she snapped. "Where is he?" "Want to come in?" "I certainly do not." Why aren't you answering your telephone?" Mrs. Winship demanded. "I left you a message about dinner engagements. That was 2 nights ago, and I've received no reply." Dwayne Scrooge Sr. sighed ruefully, and so did the large macaw on his shoulder. "I see you still got that stupid bird," Mrs. Winship remarked. "She's not stupid. She speaks 3 languages." "Really? Pick one and have her tell me where DJ is." "She doesn't know," Dwayne Scrooge Sr. muttered, "and I don't either." It was unsatisfactory answer as far as Miss Winship was concerned. "We're talking about your only child," as she was glaring, "and you don't know where he's at?" Dwayne Scrooge Sr. opened the door and came out of the porch. He said he was going camping somewhere in the boonies. "And that was a couple days ago, and you haven't seen him since?" "But what about school?" Mrs. Winship asked. "He said he needed a break." "Oh, that's rich." Dwayne Scrooge Sr. threw up his hands, nearly topping the macaw from his root of his shoulders. "What do you want me to do, Millie? The boy has his own agenda. I can't make him do what he doesn't want to do." "Oh, of course not. You're just his father," Mrs. Winship said sarcastically. "Is he in trouble again? And tell me the truth for once." Dwayne Scrooge Sr. sat in a rotting wicker chair and vigorously clawed at the insect bite on one of his bare feet. "A cop was here about an hour ago," he admitted. "Somebody lit a fire out in the big cypress, and they think it was Junior." Melissa Winship closed her eyes and thought, "Not again." Dwayne Sr. said, "They don't have enough to bust him. They're just fishing is all." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Dwayne Scrooge Sr. reached in his pocket and took out some sunflower seeds, which he fed to the macaw. He said, "When DJ gets home, I'll make sure he calls you. Maybe we can all go to that steak place again, the one near Bonita Beach." "Unless he's in jail," Mrs. Winship said, "in which case we can bring him a lovely fruit basket." "Oh, don't be like that." "Are you still out of work, Dwayne?" "What do you expect? I got no wheels." Indignantly, he pointed to the Tahoe upon which he had painted "Boycott Smithers Chevy." They still won't give me my new transmission, he griped. Perhaps it's because you torched their building. You think you might have something to do with that? Beside the point, Dwayne Sr. huffed. I paid my debt to society, and I did my time. Mrs. Winship was more and more than angry. Despite his unattractive personality, Dwayne Scrooge Sr. has always been a hard worker and a good provider until Whitney ran off to France. Then he sort of fell apart, losing all interest in the unique piano shop that he had owned in Naples. Within a year, that place gone bankrupt, and since then, Dwayne Scrooge Sr. hasn't been able to hold a steady job. At a low point had come when he burned down the Chevrolet dealership. Those 6 months you were locked up, Mrs. Winship, I still don't understand why you didn't have Junior call me. What were you thinking letting that boy stay out here by himself? Dwayne Scrooge Sr. looked up from his big chewed foot. Maybe I was ashamed for you to know what happened, he said in a scratchy voice. Hey, DJ took care of himself just fine. He never went hungry, Millie, and I had money put away. Money that I sent you, said Mrs. Winship, so that you wouldn't lose your house to the bank. There was plenty of groceries, Dwayne Scrooge Sr. went on. He did all right, like I've told you 100 times. Mrs. Winship shook a finger at me. Nothing is all right around this place. Not you, not your son, nothing. It's time for you to get a grip on life, Dwayne. Time to move on. Dwayne Scrooge Sr. rose with a squeak from the old wicker chair. Yeah, he said. Mrs. Winship rolled her eyes. Would you kindly tell your parrot to be quiet? He's not a parrot. How does Dwayne Jr. get out of where he's out camping at? Dwayne Scrooge Sr. said. He drove himself. He did what? He's got a license, Millie. He turned 16 2 months ago. Mrs. Winship's eyes narrowed. I'm quite aware of that. I sent a birthday card, remember? Dwayne Sr. looked embarrassed. I told him to call you and say thanks for the check. I'm guessing he forgot. So you bought him a car? No, I fixed up a motorcycle that we found in the want ads. DJ's fond of those motorcycles. Oh, terrific. Next Christmas I'll get him a helmet, Mrs. Winship said, and some funeral insurance. Dwayne Scrooge Sr. frowned. Now, why do you always have to take it a snippy tone? Why? Por qué? Growled the macaw. Listen to me, Dwayne, Mrs. Winship said forcefully. If I don't hear from my grandson soon, life will get extremely unpleasant for you. I'm not paying his tuition so he can skip class and roast weenies in the woods. That's an insult to me, and I resent being insulted. Dwayne Scrooge Sr. flinched like a puppy that had just seen smacked on the butt with a newspaper. He said, I'll do my best to find Junior. Good idea, because I'm not leaving town until I see him, Mrs. Winship declared. Now give me a straight answer. Do you think he's the one who set the fire in the swamp? Truly? I can't say. Why in the world would he do such a thing, Mrs. Winship said. Since you're the only other arsonist I know, I thought maybe you'd have some special insight. Dwayne Sr.'s eyes flashed in anger. I never thought that boy to set fires. He knows better. Then let's hope the police are wrong. She was halfway down the steps when he called her name. Hey, Millie, wait. What do you hear from Whitney? The question made Millicent Winship heart sink. She looked up at Dwayne Sr. and quietly said, She's not coming back from Paris. So the cheese business must be good, huh? I'm sorry, I really am. And by the way, your precious bird just pooped all over your shirt. Dwayne Scrooge Sr. looked down at the mess and nodded. What else is new? On the same Monday morning when Nick had watched the smoke eat Mrs. Starch's pencil, Captain Gregory Walters was being evacuated from Iraq to an American military installation in Germany. From there, he was flown to the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., a hospital for soldiers. Nick and his mother flew up on Thursday morning and waited an hour in the lobby. Finally, a doctor came out and introduced himself. They followed him along a maze of drab corridors, teeming with nurses and orderlies and patients. Nick had never seen so many young men and women in wheelchairs. The doctor took Nick and his mother into a private room. Using a cross-section diagram on the human body, he explained Captain Waters had lost his right arm and most of his shoulder. When something called a rocket-propelled grenade, or an RPG, had struck the Humvee in which he was riding. We know, his mother said. They phoned us from the base in Ramadi. Can I see him now? Did they also tell you because of the severe damage to the shoulder, we might not be able to fit your husband with a working prosthetic? Like a mechanical hook, you mean? It would be difficult, the doctor said, but we are not giving up hope. Can we see him, please? The doctor led him to a flight up of stairs and then down another long corridor. Every patient that saw missing an arm or a leg, sometimes both legs. Nick tried not to stare. Before entering his father's hospital room, he paused to brace himself. Captain Gregory Walters was propped up in bed. His eyes were closed. His chest was wrapped with gauze and heavy tape, moved up and down slightly when he breathed. Nick noticed that his dad's hair had been shaved, and that one side of his face was pink and mottled with welts. A clear tube carried amber fluid into the remaining arm in the plastic bag strung on the aluminum rack beside his bed. Her eyes swelling, Nick's mother stood wordlessly at the foot of the bed. She looked shaky, so Nick put her arm around her waist and walked her to the only chair in the room. He's still on a lot of pain meds right now, the doctor said, so he's very groggy when he wakes up. Could I get my mom a glass of water, Nick said. Or could you get my mom a glass of water? After the doctor left, another long hour passed before Nick's father awoke. He smiled deeply when he saw them, and Nick's mother hugged him and stroked his face. Nick squeezed her left hand, and his father squeezed back firmly. Glancing at the bandaged knob where his right arm used to be, he joked, "Now I'll have to sew up my extra sleeve in all my shirts." Nick's mom said, "Very funny, Greg. So I'll have to learn how to throw a curved left-hander. No big deal." "Always a good athlete," Nick's father said. Had been a pitcher in the Baltimore Orioles farm system in which she had first met Nick's mother. According to the newspaper clippings in a family scrapbook, Greg Walters' fastball had once been clocked at 94 miles per hour. He never made the big leagues, so he's gone back to college, earned a degree in business administration, and taken a desk job with a sprinkler supply company in Fort Myers. After those 3 years of being bored out of his school, he returned to baseball as a pitching coach for a minor league club. He was happy, but the money wasn't great. That's one reason he had joined the National Guard. The sign-up bonus had paid for Nick's first year at the Truman School. For one weekend every month, Greg Walters went to Tampa to train as an Army soldier. The country was at peace, and neither nor the family had ever imagined that he'd be sent overseas to real combat. Everything changed after the invasion of Iraq. "Did they say when I can go home?" Nick's father asked. "It all depends. Tomorrow you start rehab," Nick's mother said. "What fun!" Greg Walters blinked heavily. "I'm so tired." Nick's gaze fell upon the rounded white knob of gauze and tape where his father's muscular right arm had once been. The bandages were so shiny that they looked fake, like part of the mummy costume for Halloween. His mom said, "Greg, you get some rest. We'll come back at dinner time." "You're not going to try to feed me like a baby, are you?" No, sir. You're going to feed yourself." "That's my girl," Nick's father grinned. "Nicky, how you holding up?" "I'm good, Dad." "It's a real tough deal, I know, but things could be worse," he said. "I was lucky to get out of that place alive. The guy sitting right next to me, he didn't make it." Nick felt his head start to spin. Was he your friend? Like a brother. Nick lowered his eyes. He almost was unbearable to think how close his father had come to dying. When he looked up again, Captain Gregory Walters was fast asleep. After visiting Dwayne Scrooge Sr., who was not especially helpful, Detective Jason Marshall picked up Dr. Dressler at the Truman School, and together they went out to the residence of Bunny Starch. The headmaster had requested to come along, which was fine with the detective. Walking up the creaking steps to the old house, Dr. Dressler exclaimed, "The rat's gone." "The what?" the detective asked. "She put a stuffed rat on the rocking chair," Dr. Dressler said. "She named it after one of her former students." Jason Marshall looked doubtful. "I'm serious," said Dr. Dressler. The detective knocked on Bunny Starch's door. Nobody answered. He pressed the doorbell, but it was out of order. They walked around to the other side of the house and rapped on the back door. Still no response. "I guess I'll come back tomorrow," Jason Marshall said. Dr. Dressler was disappointed. "Can't you just break in? What if she's ill or had an accident or something happened?" "I can't go inside a house without a search warrant," the detective explained. "And a judge won't give me a warrant unless there's a cause to believe a crime's been committed. There's no evidence of that, Dr. Dressler." Frustrated, the headmaster trailed Jason Marshall back to the unmarked police car. "That letter I got about the family emergency, I just don't buy it," Dr. Dressler said. "The woman has no family that I can locate anywhere." The detective leaned against the fender of his car and took out a pack of chewing gum. He offered a piece to Dr. Dressler, who said no thanks. Libby told me all the crazy stories about Mrs. Starch, Jason Marshall said. Kids love to talk, and normally I wouldn't pay much attention. But now you're telling me she kept a stuffed rat on the porch? This is not a normal person in the world, would you agree? Dr. Dressler nodded. She's a bit quirky for sure. Maybe she's just freaked out after the fire and the field trip, detective speculated. That had to be a really scary experience. Eventually, she finds her way out of the woods and rushes to her house with Libby's asthma inhaler. Then she drives home, looks in the mirror, and says, "Geez, I could have died out there. I really need some time off." Dr. Dressler was skeptical. Not Bunny Starch, he said. "Imagine spending the night all alone out in the cypress while it's burning," Jason Marshall said. "I don't care how tough you are. It definitely would shake you up." Anything's possible, I suppose. Just a theory. The detective took out his cell phone. "What's the number of this house?" By the now, the headmaster knew it by heart. 555-2346, he said. Jason Marshall dialed and waited. Mrs. Starch's phone rang twice, once before an answer machine picked up. "There's a message," the detective whispered to Dr. Dressler. "What does it say?" Jason Marshall touched the redial button and handed the cell phone to Dr. Dressler, and the headmaster listened intently to the recorded greeting on the other end. "Hello, people. I'll be away from school indefinitely because of an unexpected family matter. You may leave a message at the tone, though it might be a while before I have time to reply. Please accept my apologies in advance. Now here's the beep." "Is that her voice?" the detective said. "Sure sounds like it," Dr. Dressler said. "First the letter, now the voice message on her phone. I've got to be honest, there's nothing more the sheriff's office can do. The woman is obviously alive and well," said Jason Marshall. "Then why no phone calls? Maybe she doesn't feel like answering questions about a family emergency that doesn't really exist. Like I said, she probably just needed a break so she could have an excuse not to come to school." "But that is not like her," Dr. Dressler said. "Some people burn out on their jobs all of a sudden. I've seen it happen before." The detective opened the car door and slid behind the wheel. "Just a second," Dr. Dressler said, and he stepped quickly to the Mrs. Starch's mailbox and peeked inside. It was empty. On the ride back to the Truman campus, the headmaster asked Jason Marshall about the arson investigation. The detective said that he had turned over the information about Dwayne Scrood Sr. to the fire department. "So far, they haven't been able to connect him to the crime," Jason Marshall said. "Did they turn up any clues?" "Nothing that panned out. Near the scene of the fire, they found a ballpoint pen with a name on it, Red Diamond Energy. Some kind of oil and gas company from Tampa with a small lease out near the swamp." Jason Marshall said, "Needless to say, young Mr. Scrood is not on their payroll. It's unlikely that the pen was his. So what happens to the young arson case? Not much unless we catch a break." Privately, Dr. Dressler was relieved that Dwayne Jr. wouldn't be arrested anytime soon, if at all. The ugly publicity would be damaging to the reputation of the school. Years earlier, a Truman student had been caught driving a stolen snow cone truck, and it had made the TV news all the way over in Miami. "Do you want me to call you when Dwayne returns to class?" the headmaster asked Jason Marshall. "Would you still like to speak with him?" "Might as well, just to let him know he's on our radar." "Good idea," said Dr. Dressler, although he suspected that Dwayne Scrood Jr. would not be even slightly intimidated. End of chapter 7.